What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Event Marketing Redefined. I am your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. And today we have Marlys Arnold with us. She is a trade show consultant. She's written 2 books, Build a Better Trade Show Image, Exhibit Design That Works. She also has an online community, Exhibit Marketers Cafe, and she has her own podcast called Trade Show Insights. And we are bringing her on today because this topic of exhibitor education is a relevant one. It's something that has always been relevant. And as we come out of COVID, has been, in my eyes, something that is needed and talked about kind of more and more, because you have such a churn in a lot of these positions where people are thrown to the fire to handle trade shows for a company. And so Marlys is here to help offer some insight, give you some of her, we'll call them 10 commandments on BoothStaffing, and a lot of cool takes here. So Marlys, welcome. Thanks for coming on and talking to me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Thanks for asking.
So when you and I first spoke, we talked about the Exhibitor Education Manifesto, right? You wrote this manifesto to kind of explain what exhibitor education is, what it isn't, and kind of why it matters. So let's start there, because I'm a firm believer in exhibitor education, right? I think the more tools, resources, and knowledge that exhibitors have, especially young ones and people new to it, the more valuable they are to their own organization and the better results they're going to ultimately get, which is what trade show is all about. So tell us a little bit about the Exhibitor Education Manifesto.
A little bit of backstory on how I came to write that. It started as just a blog post and podcast episode on the importance of exhibitor education. And that actually stemmed from the Center for Exhibition Industry Research. CEIR had put out a report on how the exhibit dollar is spent. And the breakdown was that exhibit staff training came in absolute dead last at 1% or less. And so I was talking in my blog post and podcast about the importance of why exhibitors need education. And it's something that shouldn't just be, just kind of thrown down at the bottom of the heap or the last thing on the list, but it's really important. Well, that actually then sparked, for some reason, controversy online. I had another blogger that just lit into me, and I had a lot of people just talking about, well, exhibitors they should know what they're doing, and they're sending your sales staff and they know how to work a trade show and all this. And I thought, wow, this is really amazing that this is creating controversy about what, people need to know these things. I mean, I've been doing this for over 20 years. I'm still encountering exhibitors, some of whom have been exhibiting for many years, and they still are clueless about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I created this manifesto about what exhibitor education is, what it isn't, and why all exhibitors really need to be better educated. And so, some of the things that I'm not talking about training your sales staff on how to be good salespeople. Obviously, no, they should be getting that training elsewhere. But teaching them how to interact in the booth, how to behave in the booth. I mean, anybody who's walked a trade show recently knows that there's a lot of bad behavior that goes on the show floor. And, exhibitors, exhibit staff is standing there, on their cell phones or talking to each other instead of the audience. There's so many things they're doing wrong. And that's what exhibitor education is so important. But it also goes all the way back to what to do before the show. And, I do a lot of exhibitor consultations, and I still see exhibitors that, they don't understand that it's their job to promote. They think that all the promotion comes from the show organizer and they don't need to do anything. And, there's just so many issues, and it's just something that shouldn't be overlooked.
I think one of the things that I always tell our clients, or even anybody in the trade show on the space, on the corporate side, something I always say is, like, you have to squeeze all of the juice out of the fruit that is trade shows when you're exhibiting. And there's so many areas, there's so many sections, little specific niches and things that you can do to get the most out of your trade shows. I think it lines up perfectly with kind of what we're talking about here. Tell me a little bit about, you had mentioned those consultations that you do. What do those kind of look like?
Well, it's really interesting because it can be anything from, solopreneur or small entrepreneur who's doing their very first 10 by 10 in a trade show, to somebody who's got a huge island space and a large staff, but they just feel like that there's something maybe that they're missing, or they really feel like they need to take their exhibit to the next level. I recently did a consultation with someone who said, hey, we exhibited at this show last year and we get okay leads, but we really want to ratchet it up and take it to the next level. And we want to, double or triple the number of leads that we get this time. And so there's always potential. There's always room for improvement. And I love when exhibitors come to me and they can see that, and they come to me and they say, hey, we know we need to do something different. Give us some ideas, give us some tips. What can we do differently? What can we scale up from what we've done in the past, or what can we start over? Or what do we need to, do we need to change the look of our exhibit? Do we need to change, what we're doing for giveaways or promotions? So there's so many different ways that they can go.
From a broad stroke sense, when someone says, hey, we want to 2x and 3x our leads, right? Kind of advice, where are you, where are you looking? What kind of questions are you asking them? Where are you starting with someone that says we want a 2x or 3x leads? Because I think almost anybody listening to this that's a corporate event marketer or working for a company wants to 2x or 3x their leads. Where do they start?
Well, where they need to really start is go all the way back to what is their goal? What are they wanting to accomplish? Who is their target audience? And one of the things that I hear from exhibitors, especially new exhibitors, they'll go to a show that's maybe, attendance of 5,000 and they want to get 3,000 leads. And then I, kind of backtrack them, and it's like, okay, you have a 10 by 10 booth. It's a 3-day show. You can't talk to 3,000 people. And besides those 3,000 people, you're not going to get 3,000 leads. So let's scale it back and figure out what is realistic, who within that group of, again, say 5,000, who within that audience is your ideal target? Because even if it's a fairly niche show, that doesn't mean that everybody in that audience is your target market, your ideal client. So figuring out, maybe there's 25% of the attendees that are really, would be looking for whatever it is that you offer. So your job is to figure out how to connect with that 25%. And then that's when I start working with the exhibitor to really figure out, okay, how do we do that? Is it through the way we promote? Is it through what you do in the booth that attracts the right people? And ultimately it's a combination of all of those things. Yeah. But if you're trying to market, it's just like in general marketing. If you're trying to market to everyone, you're probably not going to connect with much of anybody. But if you really zero in, and I've had exhibitors push back and go, well, if I just zero in on that 10% of the audience or 20% of the audience, won't I be missing a lot? And the answer is not really, because still everybody's going to walk by. And if they feel a connection, they're going to want to talk to you. But if you're really zeroing in on that 20% that's your ideal audience, then, you're drawing those people in, and it really doesn't matter how many others come into your booth.
I really like how you kind of started with the basics, right? Of, what are your goals? Who is your audience? But then I think even smarter than that is sort of you breaking down attendance for people, because I think a lot of times companies sign up for trade shows and it's not as exact as they would like to be. They don't have all the data. They're making subjective decisions to go exhibit, not objective decisions, which is fine because it's difficult to narrow that down. And portfolio planning, like true portfolio planning, takes a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of work, and a lot of data. So essentially what you're saying is like, hey guys, like, let's get realistic here. This is the attendance. This is what your audience is. This is what's probably probable at this point. Then getting dialed into who those people are and how you're going to go present yourself in the most direct, to the point, problem solving for those individuals type way. I like how you kind of laid that out. You said something when we talked earlier that salespeople and execs make like the worst booth workers, right? Like the worst people for the booth. What did you mean by that?
Let me qualify and say not all salespeople and executives are wrong for the booth. But in general, that's a complaint I hear from exhibit managers all the time. They're like, they roll their eyes and say, oh no, we've been told we have to have all the sales staff there, or we have to have the CEO there, and so you have to have these people in the booth, but they're not doing a good job, because salespeople, and I did a whole blog post on this about why salespeople are not your best booth staffers, but the reason is they tend to be very myopic. They know their territory, and so they'll look at a badge and say I rep the East Coast, and I see somebody from Texas walk in. Well, I'm going to go, oh well, they're not in my territory, and just blow them off. Well, that doesn't work. You've got to be welcoming to everybody and talk to everybody, and then hand that lead off to whoever best is appropriate. So that's one of the problems with salespeople. The other problem is that a lot of times they tend to be like all talk and no listen. And the whole key when you're in a trade show booth is you got to listen. You got to ask questions and listen to the attendee and find out what it is they're looking for, rather than just launching into this big sales pitch. And so those are two of the areas where salespeople can be a challenge. And again, it goes back to, they just need some training. They need some education on not how to be a better salesperson, but how to have a better booth persona and how to better interact with attendees. The executives, on the other hand, sometimes they just don't know how to relate in the booth. So, but those are the two common things that I hear, like I said, from exhibit managers. They're always telling me that those two categories of people are very challenging to have in their booth.
I think it's a great thought, is the reason that, I ask, because, I've had friends who are salespeople for big companies that just get flown in. They just get flown in for the conference. They show up. They don't have a plan in front of them. They don't really know what's going on. So I always say, to your point, I'm urging event marketers, is your job as the event marketer to be sort of the conduit, the connective tissue to sales, to the execs, to marketing, to all these other departments to pull this off right. And if you know that you have certain salespeople coming, how do you get their buy-in? How do you prep them? How do you make them most effective so that when they get to the show floor, you're getting the most out of them? And I honestly think you're not going to retrain a salesperson, but by arming them with as much information as necessary for that event, the theme, the goals, what you're trying to accomplish, what kind of conversations you want to have, I think you are 10 times better off, and you're already winning if you can get to the show by doing those things.
Exactly. And again, like I said, it goes back to the education, and a lot of times you get pushback from those sales reps too. I can remember years ago, I was hired to come in and do training for an entire sales team at their national sales meeting for all of their show, just general exhibitor training for all of their shows that they do. And I remember, a lot of those guys, they just sat there with their arms crossed and looking at me like, I dare you to teach me anything. But they really did learn things. I mean, my client, who was the sales manager, he told me later about how seeing the changes from these guys on the show floor, that it actually did soak in, and they did learn some different ways to interact on the show floor. The other thing that is a problem a lot of times, especially like you said, when all these people are flown in from all over the country, they have a tendency to look at it as a reunion, and they just kind of all huddle up in one part of the booth, and they're all there at the same time in the booth and just hanging out and having a good time and not interacting with people. And that's a bad behavior as well.
Yeah. I like that some of the stuff, that's basic stuff, but it happens. It's happening all the time. And then companies wonder why they're not getting results. The salespeople are like, oh, this show sucks. I don't get anything from it. And then there's downward pressure from CFO, right? From other people. It's like, why are we spending this money? What are we doing here? And really, it is all about squeezing the most juice out of the fruit for a trade show. Goes in so many, from pre-show to educating cross departments to getting everybody on. I mean, so many different things that go into it. Tell me a little bit about like low hanging fruit, right? What's a typical story? Something that basically you see all the time that doesn't get picked up in normal training. What's kind of like some low hanging fruit for you?
Well, some of the low hanging fruit, some of the things are what we already talked about of, they're not zeroing in on the right audience. Sometimes they're just not taking advantage of some of the free opportunities that the show offers for promotion. There could be, free invitations. Maybe the show has arranged for a way that they can either send the invitations for them, or they can provide them with tools that they could use to send out as invitations. So there's lots of tools like that. There's just being aware. And it kind of goes back to my background how I got into all of this. I had been doing exhibiting myself for my own business. I've pretty much always been a solopreneur. And so I'd been doing some exhibiting at shows, and then I'd also helped to organize some local events. And so I kind of saw from both sides what people were doing or not doing. And one of the things I saw was that there's this disconnect between the exhibitors and the show organizers, and the exhibitors don't realize a lot of what's available. And I would take advantage, I would try to connect with any organizer that I was working with and say, okay, what opportunities do you have? Sometimes I would find maybe there might even be a sponsorship that wasn't being picked up, and they would let me have it for a discounted fee or something, or the opportunity to speak on stage, or all these kinds of things, because I asked. And a lot of exhibitors just don't ask. They don't investigate what that show is offering, those wonderful additional opportunities beyond just renting your space and showing up.
Let's stay on booth staffing. I think it's a big topic because it's at every single show. Everyone has to deal with it. You wrote the 10 commandments of booth staffing. Let's review the 10 commandments of booth staffing and give out some practical tips and, discuss a few of them.
Well, one of the biggest ones that I see a lot is the issue of cell phones. People, I can walk by an exhibit and say there's 3 staffers. One will be at this end on the phone, one will be at the other end texting, and then the third person is, also doing something on their phone. I mean, nobody's paying attention to the people right in front of them. And I get that, especially if you're a salesperson, or if there's things going on back at the office, that there's stuff that you need to do. You need to talk to people. You may need to return a text, whatever, but you step away from the booth to do that. You don't stand in your booth and, just head down on the phone. That's probably the one thing I see the most often, especially these days. Another one is
present, right? I mean, be present, be engaged, be active, people are attracted to that when you're in person at events.
Well, I always tell exhibitors, it's like, you paid good money to be in front of the people that are walking the aisles. You can have this. Yeah, don't miss the opportunity. You can have this other conversation off the show floor, or walk to the end of the aisle and stand in some open space, or go outside, or whatever you need to do to have that conversation on the phone. But when you're in the booth, you are in the booth. I mean, you are there to interact with the people that are walking by. So that's really key. Another thing that I see a lot is I tell people, you shall not sit. And that's not to say you can't ever sit. I know a lot of exhibitors now have like a conference area, whether it be, a high table with bar stools, or a lounge area or something. But what I tell exhibitors is, don't sit unless you're sitting with an attendee or a client and having a conversation. You don't want to just be looking like you're just sitting there lounging in your booth. You want to be up and engaged and interacting, and then take them over to the lounge area and sit down and have a conversation. That's fine. But too many people, the chairs, for a long time I said no chairs at all in exhibits. And now I understand, there really is a need for that in certain instances, but don't use the chair as a crutch where you're just sitting there waiting for the next person to walk by, because they're probably not going to come in your booth.
You know what else I like about just those two? I know they're simple, but it's kind of like, look, when you go to a party, when you are in a social setting, which is what a trade show is, people gravitate towards energy. They gravitate towards conversation. They don't gravitate towards people sitting by themselves, or sitting and looking miserable, or on their phones off in another faraway land. They gravitate towards the party. They gravitate towards the engaging face-to-face discussion, the liveliness. So that's what I like about those two. Let's go to the third.
Well, there's another one that's kind of the flip side of that. You don't want to ignore them, but you also don't want to attack them either. And I see
Yeah.
that so often. In fact, I just was recently talking with an exhibitor, and he said, okay, we want to have two staffers in the booth, and then we want to have one out in the aisle. And I'm like, no, you don't want to have like one out in the
Yeah.
aisle. You want the people in the booth to be engaging and starting the conversations to draw people in, but you don't want to be out in the aisle
Yeah.
basically capturing people and dragging them into your booth. That is not the point.
Hit us with the fourth.
Well, another one is you don't want to put out every piece of literature you have or every giveaway you're giving away, or just piling stuff on your table, because that encourages what I call the scoop and run syndrome, where people just come by, they see stuff, they grab it, they throw it in their tote bag, and then it may never be looked at or touched again until it goes in the trash. But you want to use anything that you're handing out, you want it to be presented after you've had a conversation. So especially your giveaway should be more as a thank you for somebody stopping by your booth, talking with you, and definitely giving you the opportunity to scan their badge or collect their contact information. You don't just want it to be, as people often say, trick-or-treaters running by and grabbing things.
Yeah. That one, I think a lot of literature ends up all over the place. It's information overload. No one wants to sit and read something. I always say, use it as an opportunity to engage, right? Use it as an opportunity to create engagement, to give something away. Or if you're going to give them something that they're going to need to read, or that they're going to need to open up later date, not just a handout,
Or even better, have a QR code that they can scan, and it downloads the PDF straight to their phone, or sends them straight to the link or whatever. But that way they don't have to carry things around. I do realize there are still some people who like to have, they just prefer that physical piece of paper. So having a few pieces of literature or whatever in your booth is fine. But again, you don't need to like pile out stacks and stacks of things.
All right. What's your fifth?
Don't eat or drink. And, I see this a lot, and a lot of shows, unfortunately, encourage this bad behavior because they'll have happy hours on the show floor. And at that point, all the exhibitors are standing around eating and drinking, and they're, not really maybe sometimes on their most professional behavior, should we say. But, as far as having food and drink in the booth, I have some personal stories of things that went wrong. When I was a new exhibitor, I was working with someone else. And at the time I was repping for a high-end line of women's clothing. And so we had portfolios that had all these fabric swatches in them. I mean, they were very expensive. We had to buy the portfolio each season. And it was, this very deluxe book. I was working with someone else who had her can of pop there on the table, and it got knocked over all over my portfolio. And I was really mad. I mean, it made me look so unprofessional, even though I wasn't the one who had done it. And, so from that, I actually, at that point, I made the rule that like, no, no food and drink allowed in my booth. But, just the unprofessionalness of it, of standing around, if you're stuffing your face with a cheeseburger or something, nobody's going to want to stop and talk to you.
Let's go to number 6.
You shall not leave early or arrive late. That's another one that I see, especially the leave early part. A lot of exhibitors shut down before the show is ever over. And I feel like that is extremely rude to the attendees because, somebody who maybe could only be there on the last day, maybe they weren't there for the whole time. They're walking the show floor that afternoon of the last day. They deserve to have the same experience as the people who were there on the first day. And I actually, again, back to one of my first experiences as an exhibitor, I remember I was standing there with my staff in the booth, and a lady walked by and actually thanked us. She said, I'm not looking for what you guys offer, but I just want to thank you because I couldn't come until this afternoon. And almost everybody was starting to pack up and leave. And she said, I want to thank you for actually being here and being professional and being ready to talk to people on the last day. And I've actually heard other exhibitors say that they get their best leads of the show sometimes at the very end, like within the last couple hours. So it goes back to, you paid money to be there the whole time. So why pack it in early?
I think something to add on to that is I'm a firm believer in this one, right? About not leaving early in particular. So a few stories. One is there was a time that we exhibited, and essentially somebody had come the last hour or two, just double backed, said, hey, wanted to wait till the crowd died down, wanted to have a conversation, right? That is a very common thing that happens with our clients all the time. I have heard it happen to us, but I've heard that story happen over and over. And I think what people have to realize is not everybody's extroverted. Not everybody's going to walk up in the middle of a show with a lot going on and come in and say, here I am. Some people want to take their time. They want to walk the floor. They take notes. They know where they want to go back to. They know who they want to have conversations with. They may have classes. They may have networking those first 2 days, whatever it may be. They will double back. Another really good is I had Rebecca Abrams on my show, and she runs events for Calendly. And she told the story where she was at a trade show, and last hour of the show, someone just popped in. She had been around prior, but came back end of the show to come and have a conversation that turned into a 6-figure deal for Calendly. So the advice of don't leave early, I understand why some people do. It does get dead, but you have to understand not everybody wants to talk to you those first 2 days, and people will double back.
Well, and I've actually heard stories too of like high level decision makers who use that as a tactic to eliminate people. They will walk back around the last afternoon of the show and see. And if, maybe they were considering 3 different vendors and one of them is packed it in early, well, they're not going to get the business. Yeah. So they use it as a way to kind of eliminate options, I guess you could say at that point.
All right. So we have no phone, no sitting, don't be out in the aisles overselling. And I'm not saying he's correct with your commandments, but I'm giving the rough, don't over hand out literature and have it everywhere. No eating and drinking. Do your best not to leave early or arrive late. Right. So that's 1, 2, 3, that's 6. What's the 7th?
Let's see. Again, I'm not going in order here, so I'm trying to see which ones I haven't covered yet. Oh, you shall not fill your booth with staffers. So too many exhibitors, they think, oh, we got to have, we got a 10 by 10 booth. We got 4 people going to the show. We got to have all 4 people in the booth. No, if you have 4 staffers in a 10 by 10 space, nobody is going to want to walk into your booth. Well, nobody can probably walk into your booth because you've got it full of people. So, and again, it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier with the sales team, and they all congregate and hang out in the booth. If you have if you're blessed to have this huge roster of people at the show that you can have in your booth as staffers, rotate them out. You don't need to have all of them there at a time. Rotate them out, give them the opportunity. Everybody wants the opportunity to actually walk the show. So I know I've worked a lot of shows by myself in a booth, and I feel like, I never get the chance to actually see the show. So, schedule time for each person to be outside the booth, walking the show, learning, experiencing, going to sessions, whatever, but have just a limited number of people. And obviously it's going to be like day 1, you're going to need a few more people in your booth than you would on day 3, last day, whatever. But, just making sure you're scheduling those people so that they're not all hanging out in the booth all the time.
Do you feel like if you're overstaffed in your booth, it can be intimidating for others?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Well, especially if you're all dressed, like say everybody wears a red shirt, if the booth is full of red shirted people, then nobody's going to want to walk in because it kind of looks like a private party that they're interrupting or something.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Number 8, we got 3 more left here.
Okay. One of the things that people always think is really odd is like, you should not put your hands in your pockets, is one of my commandments. And they're like, well, that's kind of an odd commandment. Why do you say that? Well, first of all, there's a couple different reasons, but first of all, not to pick on you, Matt, but guys especially tend to keep what in their pockets? Keys, change, phone, stuff that makes noise. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're nervous, if you're standing in the booth and you're nervous and you're going to be standing there with your hands in your pockets, what are you going to be doing the whole time? Jingling.
Yep.
Yeah. So you're standing, and I know because my husband is one of these people. And it's like sometimes I'm like, just stop jingling. I'm trying to talk to you. So it can be very nerve-wracking, but it's also just bad body posture, bad.
Yeah.
it sends bad signals,
Yeah.
bad body language signals. So if you've got your hands in your pockets, same thing if you've got your arms crossed, that's also sending
Yeah.
bad signals. So, I realize it's tough, but just keep your arms at your sides and ready to, engage with people, shake hands,
Mm-hmm.
hand them, if you're doing giveaways or something, handing them something, but not, you just, again, it goes back to, like you said, you're on stage, you need to be high
Yeah.
energy and ready to engage with people.
Lot of research around body language. It's
Mm-hmm.
easy to look up for anybody. And I can tell you right now, when people are considering approaching your booth, they are looking at your body language. They are looking at the vibe of the booth. What's happening in the booth? Is it energetic? Is it lively? Does it look fun? Does it look like there's good conversation? Body language, I think, is a huge piece of that. You want to be the space that people want to come in and engage. And a
Right.
lot of that is on you. If you got a bunch of people standing with their arms crossed, hands in the pockets, on the phone, eating, looking miserable, all this stuff could
Sends
seem so
all the wrong
simple.
messages.
Yes, it
Yeah.
absolutely does. Absolutely. Okay, we got two more, one more, two more. We're on 9.
Two more.
I
Okay.
got
So
no phone, no sitting, no overselling in the aisles, no overage on literature, eating and drinking, leaving early, arrive late, don't overstaff, and no hands in the pockets.
okay. So don't create barriers to traffic. And that could be with the things in your booth, that could be with your booth staff itself. If you are, if you've got your, again, going back to, if you, especially if you've got too many staff for the size of space you have, but if everybody's like parked along the aisle and just like,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
you look like this whole what do I want to say, firing squad or something,
Yep.
So make sure that you've got people kind of spread out around throughout your booth. Spread your stuff around your booth. I always say, especially those inline booths, the 10 by 10s and the 10 by 20s,
Yeah.
you paid for the whole space, so use the whole space. Don't just use the space along the aisle. Bring people into your booth and use that space.
Yeah. There's one way in, one way out of those spaces, right? And I think the other thing is this should spark conversation inside of your organization, which is what is the attendee user experience at our space look like? When somebody comes up, what happens, right? Where are we trying to take them? How are we hosting a conversation? How are we engaging? Where are we giving stuff away? And if you
Right.
are just standing there like a firing squad, you're not going to get people to be invited to come in. Again, all this just making things more welcoming, making the conversation, the flow, the traffic, just a better space to actively engage your customer.
Well, and they've got to see there's some activity going on back behind the aisle, back farther into the booth. And in order for them to want to walk in, it's got to look like there's something going on back behind that they need to come in and actually see, or touch the product, interact with the product, explore something, see something in detail, whatever is going on in the booth needs to happen in the booth. It doesn't need to all take. And the other problem too is when everything's happening right on the aisle, it jams up traffic in the aisles. So, you want to open up that space so that people actually come in. And I think a lot of exhibitors get nervous about that because they don't quite know how to invite people into their booth. And so that's why they, like the exhibitor I talked about earlier that said he was going to have one person positioned out in the aisle. It's like, no. You need to have a booth that's appealing enough that draws people in.
Yeah. What's the 10th? What's the last?
The last one is you shall smile. And that just kind of ties back into everything we've said, having good body language, being engaged, having good energy, being ready and welcoming, just smiling. And I know by the last day, that's really hard. But again, if you've got a big enough staff and you can rotate people out so everybody feels refreshed and you're not just, sometimes you don't have an option. Sometimes it's maybe you and a partner and that's it. And you're working the whole show. But if you can at all, give people breaks. And even if you are the one doing the whole show, make sure that you do remember that you are on stage during that time, and you just got to keep being positive and being welcoming to people. Like we talked about, it doesn't matter what hour they come by your booth, they still deserve the same attention and the same pleasant demeanor.
I think what a lot of what all your 10 commandments, of booth staffing, what they really make me think is this idea that say you're a software company and you sell a $20,000 software. It's pretty expensive. There's ones at 50, you have like, what is your product? What is your service? Then compare it to, say, going out, if you're a high-end service, now consider you and a group of people that you're taking out to a high-end dinner, right? Or you're going into, I don't know, Louis Vuitton and buying a purse with your wife, your husband, whoever, and how you're going into something like that. If they're on their phones, if they're sitting down, if they're overselling you, if they're handing you literature, if they're, eating and drinking, like, think about your own personal experiences in retail. As a consumer, you don't want any of these things. You don't want barrier of entry. You don't want people standing around looking miserable. Right? You don't want to walk into a store that's got 50 people working and everybody up your, what, like, this stuff all applies to just human nature. And when you're in a trade show booth, you're selling your company, you're selling yourself. Put a smile on it. It's some showmanship. It's like, go sell yourself, go sell your company. And part of that is not doing a lot of these things, just like you wouldn't want them done to you.
Exactly. That's where I was going to go, is looking at how you get treated. You talked about the retail experience. Look about how you get treated at retail stores. How would you like to be treated instead? And really model the behavior of the way that you wish that people would treat you. And I think even in a small booth, I think if you modeled that kind of behavior and really gave people, everybody who comes into your booth, you gave them that VIP experience without making them feel, like you said, like you're just, smothering them and all over them, but just doing it in a way where it makes them feel special, makes them feel important. That's the whole key to all of this, is you got to make those attendees feel like they are the most important person on the show floor, no matter what color badge they have, no matter what part of the country they're from, no matter what their job title says. If they come in your booth and they show interest, they deserve to be treated like a VIP.
Yeah. I mean, experience is king, right? People want experiences. They want to feel a certain way. People want to feel good about their interaction. They work with people that they like. So I think a lot of these really apply directly. Okay. So we ran through the 10 commandments. What I want to kind of wrap up with here is I want to talk about another piece of education that I think is important, and that's lead management and post-show analysis, right? Two really important things. So give me your kind of broad stroke 30,000 foot view on lead management and post-show analysis, because I know we had this discussion earlier, and there's a lot of people that are just too reliant and dependent on the show organizer for these things.
Well, and not that they're necessarily dependent on the show organizer, but they just, again, it goes back to, they didn't think it through. They haven't thought through the strategy and the process and put pieces in place. And that's what I always coach exhibitors is, you've got to have a lead management strategy in place before the show ever starts. Because we all know when you get back to the office the next week, you've got 9 million emails to return. You've got 4,000 phone calls to make. I mean, all these things that you've got to do, and you're just overwhelmed. And I don't think any exhibitor goes to a show with the intention of, we don't plan to follow up with any of our leads. I mean, I don't really think they would be paying to go. But yet that's what happens, is they get all these leads and then they go nowhere. So you've got to have that strategy in place before the show starts, because afterwards it needs to just be hey, let's just implement step 1, step 2, step 3 of the follow-up process. And more than that, just building them into your ongoing nurturing process, whether that be putting them on your customer newsletter, whatever regular communications you send out, make sure that all of those leads have been incorporated into your CRM and they're all being followed up with in some way.
What does a really good lead management and post-show analysis look like for a company? What are some basics that you think they just have to do? What are some nuggets that you just, if you were to look at a company that does both of those things well, what do they do well?
Well, like I said, they've got a process. First of all, it's not just a hit and miss. They've got a system in place, and then they know how to follow it. So that's one thing. As far as the post-show analysis, it all goes back to how I said everything starts from and stems out of your goals. And if you didn't have a goal to begin with, if you didn't have a defined goal and know why you're exhibiting and what you want out of it, how do you even do that post-show analysis? Because you don't have anything to measure. You don't know, did we achieve our goal? Because you don't know what the goal is. So it's just this kind of fuzzy, oh yeah, well, we talked to a lot of people, but you've got to know what you're wanting to accomplish, and then you can better see, and sometimes, that analysis will show you that, no, that show is, like I said earlier, the exhibitor I talked to that said he wants to either double or triple his leads this year. If he goes again and he doesn't, he may sit down and go, this show, we've given it several tries and it's just not producing the leads I wanted. Whereas if he does go with the strategy and he's implemented these things and he follows up well and he sees, oh yeah, we did triple our leads this year, you bet he's going to sign up again next year. You bet he's likely going to get maybe a larger booth space. Maybe he's going to consider doing a sponsorship in addition. So it's a win-win for everybody. I always say happy exhibitors make good shows, which also equals exhibitor retention for the event organizer. So if everybody partners together, if the exhibitors and the show organizer team up to work together and help each other have a successful show, then everybody wins.
What's your thoughts on timeliness of post-show follow-up? How quick?
Well, you want to do initial follow-up right away. I mean, you want to at least acknowledge and thank the people for coming by your booth. As far as the in-depth follow-up, of course, it all depends on, how hot the lead is and what you're needing to follow up with and all those kinds of things. But some kind of initial follow-up, it's not that hard to have, some basic pre-written emails that you can tailor just a little bit depending on the conversation, but you can send those out really quickly. And
you're talking the next day, like day after?
Yeah, like within a day or two after. So you're making sure that you've got, again, it goes back to those systems, having everything in place, and then you can just implement. You can just send that out. You don't have to stop and think, or you don't have to go, oh, well, we have to craft all these emails one by one. No, you've got some templates that you can use, that you can customize and send those out.
When it comes to lead management, right? Is there any softwares you've used? You referred to process, like some companies have a good process, right? What's an example of that? What are some of the companies you've worked with that are doing it really well? What does their process look like that makes it good?
Well, again, it goes back to having your CRM system set up and being able to, tag those leads as you put them in. And then, this lead came from this show. And then you can definitely, your follow-ups then can be set per show. So, say the ABC Expo. So, these 150 leads came from ABC Expo. So you've got that, and that you can send out those follow-ups and referencing that specific show. As far as specific CRM systems and things, personally, what I use is a service called Sweet Dash. I know a lot of people use Salesforce or HubSpot, I think, anyway, there's lots of options out there, but the key is the process and the system.
Marlys, how can people find you? How can they connect with you? What's the best way to find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. They can connect with me there, or my podcast and blog is tradeshowinsights.com. And then my basic website is exhibitmarketerscafe.com. So you can find me any of those places.
What about your two books, Build a Better Trade Show Image and Exhibit Design That Works? Where can you find those books at?
Pretty much any online bookseller, or again, you can find them through my website as well. But yeah, actually Build a Better Trade Show Image, I just recently did the second edition. I did an updated edition of that one. So
very nice.
It's everywhere books are found, I guess you could say.
Very cool. Well, Marlys, thanks for sitting and talking with me. I love breaking down, your 10 commandments, because I think, you could just read them and be like, oh yeah, those are simple. Those are, oh yeah, those are obvious. But when you dive into them, there's so many layers that go into it that make those, truly good commandments of booth staffing and just the basics. And you are correct that so many people get the basics wrong. So it's difficult to get if you're getting the basics wrong, how are you going to do the advanced stuff right? Right. So I think it's a good breakdown. I appreciate you being on the show, and thanks for spending time with us today.
Thanks, Matt. I enjoyed it.
Got it. And that's the wrap, everybody. Thanks for joining us here at Event Marketing Redefined. We appreciate it, and we will catch you on the next episode. Thank you so much.